Hey, this is Steve in Dallas, Texas. It's Saturday morning, my friend, and you are listening to Light Talk.
And good morning from me. It's Stan in Gainesville, and we're discussing branding yourself, overthinking your design, and blinding the audience on Light Talk.
And this is David, coming to you from the beautiful Belmont Shore neighborhood of Long Beach, California. And if you don't already know, you are listening to Light Talk, and we are the Lumen Brothers.
Still in what are we in? Season 3, but coming up on another season.
Yeah, we're about, 8 episodes from season 4. But anyway, welcome to episode 143. And to everyone, a happy new year. You know, we just had our New Year's a few days ago. We hope that you all watched Anderson Cooper, and we all saw what we could see of Times Square and all the lighting and all the shows that we talked about last week. So happy New Year, everyone. We're excited to start 2020, which, by the way, I thought was the start of a new decade, but technically it's not.
We're already in the new decade, no?
No. The new decade starts at 2021. Because if you think about it, 2001 is the start of a new decade. 2011
and then we're in the
11th
11th year of the 10s?
No, we're in the 10th year of the 10s. So the way it works.
No, that's not right.
No, it is. It goes because year one, there is no year zero. There's a year one, right?
But year one is an anniversary of the first year.
So then 2019 would be the last. Okay, I got to get this straight out. We're going to do some research on this because we have nothing else to do in our lives.
The next decade starts on January 1st. And then you celebrate its anniversary at 01 because 2021 is the end of 2020, the first year of the decade. I think you got it backwards.
No,
David.
It's 2021. What was the first day of the new millennium?
The first day of the new millennium would have been January 1st, 2000.
There you go. I think
and at the end at 24 hours into that day would have been the first day, the end of the first day. So like right now I'm 62 years old, right? But I'm really living my 63rd year because in June I'll be 63, but I will start my 64th year on Earth.
So in other words, you'll be actually 64 years old when you're 63.
That's correct.
Getting back to New Year's, my question is, did anyone wake up in the gutter?
Not this year.
That's good. So I hope you all had a great New Year's Eve, had fun, and you were responsible. You weren't driving while you were intoxicated. Hey, I've got a New Year's resolution update. For the listeners out there, we did our New Year's resolutions last year, and my big New Year's resolution was not to overload myself and start saying no. And sure enough, this week I did. I said no to a show. So how you like that?
Welcome to Workaholics Anonymous. You've taken the first step of the 12-step program.
Okay. I'm only on step 1. I got to find out what step 2 is.
Now you have to really screw up your website so people don't want to hire you.
Oh, I could do that. That's easy. And we want to talk about, since we're in a new decade of the show and almost a new season, next week we have our interview with Mark Brickman. So make sure you tune in to our show next week. It's a really great interview. It has nothing to do with us. It has everything to do with Mark.
Yeah, and his illustrious career in
It's
concert
pretty amazing.
And
the stories he tells are just hysterical and really interesting.
And he's given us so much of what we take for granted today, in lighting design.
Absolutely. So listen to our next show, episode 144, and it's our interview with Mark, and enjoy. And let's get started. Steve has our first listener question of the new decade.
Well, I think it could be like year zero too. I mean, I think there was a year zero.
I'm
not sure about that.
That's what
I think there was a year zero. How do we know? How do we know? It's just like Fred the caveman just popped up one day and said, it is year 1.
I think there was stuff before there were cavemen even, if we're really going back.
I think I've seen this on Ancient Aliens. I don't know what decade
we'll have to ask the carbon-14 experts.
What decade are we living in? I don't know.
I think you're right, Steve.
Anyhow, Rhonda in Tennessee writes, I was interviewing at a school for the MFA program and was asked what my future plans would be. I froze. I fumbled around for a while. How can I learn to interview, market, and brand myself? Well, I would say the first thing is prepare for your interview. I don't think interviews go well if you just walk into the room and think, I'll wing it.
No, that doesn't.
So, I mean, right now, since you said you fumbled and froze a little bit, right now, I want you to learn how to shake hands with someone. I want you to learn how to look into their eyes and introduce yourself, and I want you to develop your elevator pitch. You know, that 5-minute or 3-minute little pitch that says, this is who I am and this is what I want. You know, I would say you need to kind of come to terms with why you're going to graduate school now. And if you know why you want to go to graduate school, that probably would help inform you about what your future plans are going to be. You know, what areas do you need to improve in? What are you in search of? And regarding those future plans, sit down right now, take out yourself a pen and a piece of paper and write down some goals. You know, what do you want to accomplish as a designer? What are you interested in? Are you interested in more than one area of lighting? Are you interested in entertainment or industrial or architectural? Are you interested in stage, TV, film, concert? You know, maybe you want to work in the industry. Maybe you see yourself working someday for ETC or Martin or Clay Packey or Strand. Maybe you want to go into education. And maybe now's a good time to be thinking about where you want to launch your career. I used to say East or West Coast. Now I say East or West of the Mississippi. You know, subscribe to Art Search. Start looking at intern opportunities, and that's going to inform you a little bit about future plans. And finally, I would say start going to plays. You cannot see enough, and you'll start to develop an eye for good direction, good design, good acting, good writing. But the most important thing you can do right now is figure out why you want to be a designer. And I think that's going to inform everything else. What do you guys think?
Steve, that was really good. But I'm going to take another sort of contrarian view of this because it's very important. Yes, and very impressive to know what your plans are, how to brand yourself. This is what I want to do in 3 years. But, you know, when I went to grad school in my first year, I thought I knew what I wanted to be, and it changed totally. So I think even a better answer would be right now, this is what I think where I want to go. Mm-hmm. However, tomorrow's different. And and one of the reasons why I want to go to your school, and this is really important, everyone listening who wants to get into a school, it's an important interview, is because you're going to give me the opportunity to grow and to change my aesthetics and to evolve my artistry.
That's beautiful.
And I have no idea where I'll be in 3 years. I had no idea that I'd end up designing operas. I really didn't. I knew it was going to be musically based. I had a feeling because I was writing a lot of music, but I could have been a play designer. I could have been a Broadway designer. I could have done a lot of different things. But just because the circumstances and because of what happened in my life changed. The people I met changed, everything. And it changed me as an artist. So be open and flexible of evolving. And I think that's the type of student that I would like to teach.
Can I just offer a little a nugget philosophical statement about what you just said, David, in about 5 words? People plan and God laughs, or the universe laughs. Okay, so it's like we can plan only so much, but really there's so much random stuff that happens in life that you can sort of have a trajectory, but it doesn't work that way.
Right,
Life just doesn't work that way.
I'm going to beat up on Rhonda for a second. I think the problem here is that if you can't talk about yourself to someone for 15 or 20 minutes or an hour, I mean, you can't communicate. And if you can't communicate, you can't be a designer because you're going to be communicating your entire life. You know, I've had students who come to me and they freeze, they fumble, they mess around. But I've also had students who've come to me and without any hesitation, they have said, I want to be a Broadway designer. I want to teach college. I want to work in Europe. Now, David's right. Plans change and you change as a human being. But I want someone to come into the room and not be afraid to look at me and say, I want a Tony Award. Now, being realistic about it, I mean, it is what it is. But you've thought about something. You've found a type, as David found opera, you have found maybe Broadway and musicals. Or maybe you have found you're at your best in a classroom environment. I just want you to come in with something as opposed to sitting there, like a duck in thunder, because it's going to be very hard for you to survive in class if you're always waiting for someone else to kind of lead you and guide you. I want to know what's on your mind, and I want you to talk to me about who you are as a person.
That's great. Boy, we're really rolling here. But first of all, I don't want a Tony Award. I never wanted a Tony Award, but I do want a Knights of Illumination Award because I want that sword. I think the sword is a lot more impressive than that stupid Tony.
Well, it's practical. You could do something with the sword.
You could actually cut vegetables.
You can hurt someone.
No, we cut vegetables with it, although it's not very accurate. Anyway.
You could play samurai. You could play samurai.
Right, samurai sword.
I'll be happy with a Clay Packy T-shirt.
Oh, I forgot about that.
My goals are much less.
How about a mixed book? Can I get a mixed book? Anybody?
Don't get me started on Roscoe's mixed book. John in Baltimore writes, I am a newbie to lighting design. My college professor says I'm overthinking my design. I know what he means, but I don't know how to stop. Help. So you called the right place, John. We are Overthinkers Anonymous. So
I got an answer for that, but you go first.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's my question, so let me do my answer first.
Is that how it works?
Well, I don't want you to steal my answer because
all right.
You're going to have to come and steal. While I'm talking, you come up with a different
to create
answer.
Something else.
Exactly.
Okay.
That's why we do this. Where it's all like improv.
I see.
So anyway, okay.
I thought this was improvised.
It is improvised. I said that. It's improvised. So overthinking the design. Okay, so what your professor really means, and as you're saying, is that you're stuck. You're completely thinking about this, and you're not making a decision. Just make the decision and see how it goes. If I'm a jazz player, right, and I'm playing a piano on a jazz song, and I'm saying, okay, I know the melody, okay, and I'm going to play the melody. That's easy. That's the easy part. Maybe I'll change it up a bit, add a different note. Maybe I'll hesitate on this note, or I may anticipate that note. But all of a sudden, I'm going to start improvising when it's my time to start playing, right, to solo. And if I overthink that, I will never play a note. I'll never play another note. You got to play the notes, right? You got to just play the notes. And it's the same thing when you are designing a show. Just make the decision and play the note, right? Make the decision and look at it. And does it work? Does it not work? Did you come up with a new idea by doing that? Okay, that is really what I believe what your design professor means. And when I, see students stuck and overthinking, is this right? I don't know. Maybe it's not. Just go for it. Because remember, you've got a whole team of people, of collaborators, company of people waiting on you. And a lot of times in the profession, they're not going to be waiting on you. They're plowing ahead and you're going to be catching up. So keep making those decisions and play those notes. Okay, Stan, was that your answer?
Okay, it wasn't.
Amazing.
So I still have one.
Great.
That's good. So everything is agreeable there with what David said. And I think there's two things going on there in the mind. You have an intuitive self and you have an analytical self. And it sounds to me like you're stuck in the analytical self, right? So it's sort of like gaining this wisdom about knowing when to analyze to get to a solution and when to just be open to your intuition. And I think more often than not, when David's playing jazz, he knows music, and that's very analytical. He knows how it works. He's got the intellectual side of it, but when he's playing, he's really open to his intuition, and that intuition will tell you, hey, that's wrong, go the other direction, or that's more right. And that's what I think he means by taking a chance. So I think you want to strive for some balance or deciding when I'm going to be intuitive and just do what I feel, and when I'm going to be analytical and I'm really going to think this through. And so what to do? He says he knows what he means, but he doesn't know how to stop it. That's really the hard part of this question, I think. I don't know. If you're in the pressure cooker, you're in the hot seat, that's difficult. That's a hard one. But what we would tell an artist in general is walk away. Take a walk, take a run, take a swim, have a drink, do something other than what you're doing to let the mind let go of whatever mode it's in that it can't break out of. So I think changing the activity could be whatever it is that gets you relaxed, if you can get out of that situation. But I think it's a habit too, is developing that okay, I'm going to analyze this now. Okay, and now I'm going to work intuitively. And I think it's finding that yin yang between those two things.
Well, I would say there's something else in there too. And I would say when your professor says you're overthinking, the other thing that he or she might mean is that you've overworked the design to the point that it's absolutely bloodless. Your work is competent, but it's so overworked there's no passion in it anymore. Perhaps you're leaving nothing to the imagination of the audience. Perhaps you're not listening to the play itself. This happens every now and then. And when I see it, it's usually in the first year of the program. And I have a new student into the program, and there's no villains here, but they have something to prove. And it's not arrogance. No one likes to be laughed at. No one likes to be thought of as not as good as someone else. So sometimes they fall back on things they know rather than take a risk. So what I would say, when I see a student overthinking it, usually there's a phrase that comes out of their mouth somewhere early in the process. And that phrase is, I know exactly what this play should look like. Mm. And so before casting, before rehearsal, before they've really met with the director, I know exactly what this play should look like. And now you're trapped. You're going down a path that you can't turn around, and it's going to be a 5 count no matter what. It's going to be a blue psych no matter what, because that's what it's supposed to be. So that can be overthinking also.
Overconfidence too. It's like, staying, being uncertain. Actually, I just read this in the book I'm reading right now, and I posted it because I think it's great. Like, if someone is speaking with uncertainty, you would be wise to listen. And when someone is speaking with an exuberant level of confidence, it's possible they're telling themselves a story that's not true.
Interesting. You're talking, Stan, about intuition and analytical. I believe that lighting design, in the way I do it, and this is not for everyone, this is just my style of the process, is that there's an analytical part of lighting design, and then there's an intuitive part of lighting design. There's a definite difference, and that analytical part is all the way at the beginning and doing the lighting plot and even focusing. To an extent, because there's part of focusing that's analytical, but then you may discover something in the middle of focusing and change it, and that's somewhat intuitive. But when you're at the table, it is totally intuitive. At least you have to, you may have a cue list, and you may have an idea of what these atmospheres look like, and you may start lighting that atmosphere, but as soon as you bring that first light up, things will change. Again, it's just like playing in a band. It is. It's, I know what Misty sounds like. I know what the tempo is going to be. I know pretty much what the melody is. But until you sit down with a group of musicians, and in our case, we're talking about a group of fellow collaborators and artists at the production table, that's when the magic happens. That's when the intuition happens.
I totally agree with David. I think you're absolutely exactly right. The analytical part is front loaded, and the intuitive part comes later. Right. I totally agree. I learned that all three of us answered that question. What a bundle of wisdom we are.
I don't know, a bundle of wisdom or a bundle of crap?
A bundle of wisdom, wisdom pie. I don't know what it is, but whatever. All right. Kevin from Merrimack, Massachusetts writes, curious where you guys draw the line on overuse of audience blinders. Just saw Moby Dick at ART and was really irritated about what I felt was the overuse of an enormous wall of blinders in one particular scene. You could tell the whole audience had just about had it by the end of the scene. When is it appropriate to blind the audience? Now, I've been thinking about this question for a couple of days, and I've also been reflecting on some of the things that our wonderful guest coming up, that Mark Brickman, talked about. And 3 points I'll make. Restraint in art, right? I think there is something to be said for resisting the temptation to do more, right? We always talk about keeping it simple. And the impact, and Mark talked about that. If you give everything away or you use things too much, you would diminish its impact. So I think restraint is something that we should all be thinking about with all these fantastic new toys and tools we have. And the second point I would make is choice, right? Make a choice. Okay, so they made a choice to use it in that scene. How much they used it, or how how heavy they used it, I don't, make a decision that seems to support the work, support the action on stage, which leads to point number 3, which is why. Why are they doing it? Well, if they're doing it to advance the story, to enhance the story, to make the story more meaningful to the audience, then good. But if most of the audience is getting annoyed, then they're not thinking about the story.
Right.
So I think, right? Let me just mention, one of my students just did some assistant work on a production of Sound of Music down at the Oslo. And Corey Paddock was the designer, and they had this short little video of the last scene, which she told me was just stunning, where he worked very closely with the set designer and the director. The set breaks away and flies out, and there's this massive, bright, luminous back wall that they walk into in silhouette. And it says so much metaphorically about the future of this family and what they're going through, where they're going, and everybody knows the play. And I watched that short little snippet of video, and it was beautiful. And it seemed so right for the show. And everybody talked about how the little hairs on their neck was standing up when it happened. That's the target. That's my answer.
It always comes down to, are you telling the story or are you distracting from the story? Because if you're distracting from the moment for the sake of distraction, then
unless that's a choice, which
that
it could
be a choice, but I know Moby Dick. Listen,
I do too. I've done it also.
Moby Dick, we're talking about a 4-hour show. They're annoyed already that they have to be in that damn theater for 4 hours. So you don't want to annoy them anymore. I can't imagine where it was used, but apparently it was used over and over and over again. But maybe it worked. I didn't see the show. I have no idea. Steve, what do you think?
I think we need to look at blinders in a different context. And I think this is a device that we have borrowed perhaps from the rock and roll world. And if you think about blinders in the early days, when you went to a concert back in the days when Karen Carpenter was out there on the road and we were using torchlight. Those early days of concerts.
And Dawn Chang was lighting her.
Hey, I love Karen Carpenter. Why do you bring her into this in a derogatory way? That's terrible. They're saying that she's old, Man, I don't know, Steve, man.
In the early days, for our listeners who don't know this, the house lights were on. Right. You came to see the concert. There was a sound system there, and the house lights were on, and you put your blanket down on the floor at the Fillmore. Then we kind of evolved that. We got some lights, and we added a few Lecos or par cans, and we aimed them toward the audience. Okay. And that way the artist could see the people sitting in the auditorium and make some kind of connection. And the big effect was going to be a followspot kind of Hollywooding about the room. And then all of a sudden, flashing lights became an extension of the music. And it actually became, I'm going to say it was like a church-like event because there was a call and response. Mm-hmm. Artists would say something inside the music, maybe the chorus would come back and flash the lights in the auditorium.
Everybody say,
and the people in the auditorium.
Yeah!
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
So we got our call and response.
Yeah.
Then we added video. And now the audience could be on the screens and part of the show. Mm-hmm. Then lighting the audience with these blinders, but actually lighting the audience, it became more like a rave event. And now when you go to a concert, this is an opportunity for a selfie. Right. And all of a sudden the audience has become more important than the act on stage. There's a real dynamic that has changed in the last 30 or 40 years. And going from this kind of dimly lit room with our focus on the stage is not where we are anymore. We're now in an age of the decade of aerial effects, moving lights everywhere, the overused dance club look. So this kind of flashing and just bombarding us. But I think our experience at a concert, what we expect is very different than it was 30 or 40 years ago. Now, what does this have to do with Moby Dick? I think we're just on that edge of now starting to light the audience in theaters, that we're now starting to think, this is a cool effect.
That's true.
This is something no one's ever seen before. And so that's creeping in. And our theater audiences aren't necessarily there for that kind of experience.
Right. Agreed.
I don't know how many times you could flash lights in Rocky Horror Picture Show or flash lights in Cabaret. But it's a different audience. We come to it with a different expectation. We come to it, someone said, we're coming to it to have a story told to us and be part of that story. And if the lighting becomes a distraction, It's like my evil nemesis, the blackout. If the blackout slows the play down, or the flashing light so annoys you that you're no longer watching Moby Dick, but you're wondering why that damn light's flashing in your face, we got some problems there.
Steve got me thinking about this audience participation thing, and I'm thinking back to the 70s when I was fortunate enough to go to the Waverly Theater in Greenwich Village and see the very early weeks of Rocky Horror Picture Show in the film, right? And what happened there spontaneously, damn it, Janet, people were starting to interact with the movie and get up and throw things at the screen. But the house lights, at least the one that I was at, I don't recall the house lights being on, but that became sort of a novelty, that it wasn't the norm. And so if you start making novelties the norm, then you sort of destroy novelty. I don't know.
It comes down to the point if you're telling the story or not, or you're distracting from it.
Well, you are listening to Light Talk with the Lumen Brothers, and Light Talk is sponsored by the Incognito Note Delivery System from Freud's Friends. Giving notes can be a psychologically sensitive activity. You know what we mean. Telling the lighting designer that the cue really needs work, that the actor is in the dark, and the director is disappointed. So being a lighting designer is tough on the self-esteem. Being told that your lighting is not measuring up in public during tech can take a devastating toll on your self-worth. Get your director the INDS system and your troubles will melt away. The Incognito Note Delivery System from Freud's Friends is here to help, and here is how it works. INDS creates notes that are delivered directly to the brain in the form of a cute colored M&M. Just hold the M&M in your hand while thinking about your note. The note is instantly absorbed by the M&M and encrypted. Offer the M&M to the designer as a way to boost their energy, and the note is delivered directly to their brain along with a nice sugar rush. No one except you and the designer will be the wiser, and there will be no trace of the note once the M&M has been fully digested. INDS is certified by the NSA, the FBI, and the CIA. Deliver your notes with the security and discretion your sensitive designer deserves, with the added boost of a classic chocolate goodie. Getting a note will be a pleasure from now on, and the designer and the director relationship will be sweet. INDS, Incognito Note Delivery System from Freud's Friends. Deliver your notes discreetly and sweetly from now on.
I see one problem with this.
Yeah, okay.
I see one big problem with this.
What if they want a diet? What if they're allergic to chocolate?
No. It's even worse than that. What if because the directors I know have 800 things happening in their brains at the same time. So you may be receiving a note that's actually
not meant for you,
or maybe thoughts that weren't meant for you. Like, this person's a jerk, or damn.
That could add to the festivities.
Why'd the producer force me to cast this person? Or, oh God, she's really hot, or something like that. And you're like, where's the damn note?
Yes,
man?
I could see how it needs to be a little bit further thought out in the R&D department. But
you are depending on the director actually filtering out all those other thoughts.
It's like genetic research. We're not sure the stuff is going to work yet, but it's very promising.
Okay. All right.
And now back to Light Talk.
Well, the sound of those ducks tell us that once again it's time for our Let's Talk About segment. And today's Let's Talk About segment actually comes from a post by a fellow colleague of ours in education and in the profession, Joe Tilford, who teaches at, North Carolina School of the Arts? Is that what he teaches?
Yep, he does.
He teaches there, right?
He does.
And he's incredibly well respected. And I think he probably hit his breaking point last week because he wrote a post about the new generation of students. And I sort of came down to this question, okay? So this is the question I'm posing for our Let's Talk About segment for Steve, Stan, and I. In adjusting for the new everyone gets a trophy generation of students, are we creating a poor educational environment by coddling our students and reducing our standards? Now, before we start this discussion, we want to be clear that this problem is recognized by many of the leading stage design teachers. However, not every student has this issue, and there are some excellent students who do take responsibility for their work and thus excel in their education. But unfortunately, as time is going by, because we've seen this over like the past 10, 20 years, this seems to be more the exception than the rule. It is also important to note that this issue is not unique to stage design education. It is occurring in multiple professions. So, Stan and Steve, how do you feel about this?
I think that Joe has a good point. I think somewhere about 20, 25 years ago, we started falling into the trap of telling everyone they were exceptional and they could do anything. And that's kind of been a standard for a while right now, I think, in education. And the reality is we have students who are very good at math, but not so great at English, or very good at history, but not so good at design. So there may be some exceptionalism there, but not necessarily in every field they want to go into. And I think the problem with not raising the bar and not holding a high standard in the classroom is that those students in the classroom who are exceptional, who are the ones who are doing the day in, day out hard work of what it is to be as an undergraduate or a graduate student, at some point they see there's some smoke and mirrors going on. And they're wondering why this person isn't being called out, or why that person is being, cuddled a little bit. You know, for me, and I've been guilty of this. I'm going to fess up. I've been guilty of it. But I try just to focus on the work in the classroom. And it's about the work. You're either doing the work or you're not. Now, if you're not doing the work, that doesn't mean that we can't go bowling. Doesn't mean you're not a nice person. Doesn't mean I don't want to have lunch with you. But in the classroom and in the theater, you have to do the work. You have to make that effort. Otherwise, the degree means nothing. You're simply going through school and you're checking off some boxes, and you have wasted 3 years of your life in a program that perhaps you shouldn't be in. So I think Joe is very brave to talk about this.
I think those are good points, Steve. And I'll make a joke. You know, Warren Buffett likes to talk about we don't need to be coddling the rich. The rich are doing fine, you know, and I think he's right. I think there's a thing about culture and the culture that we create. And in some ways, it feels these days that it's not the professors who are creating the dominant culture. We're giving that power to the students to create the dominant culture. And if the students are exceptional, they create a wonderful culture. If they're hardworking and diligent, like Steve says, they create a wonderful culture. But I think it's to us to sort of set the tone of what the culture is. And I think in America, we have this sort of interesting phenomenon that we have these two items on each side of the scale. And with that, we sort of talk about equality, and we can get really, really wrapped up in that equalness and consistency and all of that I hear those words a lot. But in a free society, if it's truly free, you will never have equality. Some people are going to be more motivated. Some people are going to be more gifted. Some people are going to excel better than others. And some people are going to be less. If everything is free and people are free to indulge themselves, be as lazy as they want or be as industrious as they want. If you had a society that was regimented, and there are those, some pretty big countries across the Pacific that are incredibly regimented about education, and you will get a lot of really, really smart people, but they won't be terribly creative. Because they don't have that freedom to think in their own way and think differently and so on, which is what makes America, or one could say, makes us exceptional. So I'm not sure what the solution is to this, but I would agree with what David said at the top. We should not broad brush, which is the danger of this kind of talk, because there's a lot of really great students out there who are really committed and hardworking, and then there are less so. So I think it's up to us to keep the bar high, but we get double speak sometimes from the folks above us. Sometimes we get excellence. We must strive for excellence. We must be this. We must be that. And then you go ahead and do it. And then if somebody's not rising up to it and you lower the boom, oh, wait a minute, that student's in distress now. I think it really does fall for those of us who are, I'm in the trenches and I'm going to stay in the trenches. But for those of us who set policy and set the tone for what the culture at higher education is going to be, that's where the buck's going to stop, because most of us are pretty good soldiers. We respond to that rhetoric. And if we're getting double messages, right, or speaking out of both sides of your mouth, that becomes I think that is sort of where we sort of have to focus. It's not necessarily the student themselves. Students will usually kind of adapt to the culture that they're in, or they won't, but we have to be clear about what the culture is.
I urge everyone to go look at the Light Talk Facebook group site, and we shared Joe's missive there and read it, and there was a lot of really good points. I'm going to just quote one paragraph. Far too many of today's teachers want to be liked by their students more than they want to disabuse the students of unproductive illusions so that the students can learn to push themselves. The bias towards being liked unfortunately contributes to students shirking personal responsibility and will ultimately lead to failure in the competitive workplace later.
One of the things that I always tell my students is that I want them never to be ashamed of their education. I want them never to have to apologize for their education. There's some hard days in class. But at the end of the day, most of the students who have survived the program, over the last 60 years, have gone on to do really great things. And those great things mean they're living lives by their standards. They're teaching, they're designing, they're working in TV, they're working in film, they're working in concert. And I don't know if they would have gotten there if we hadn't kept their feet to the fire. One of my colleagues says it's important to have the designer in the hot seat. And what we mean by that is doing a lot of work, doing a lot of shows, solving a lot of problems. Mm-hmm. And you're constantly in that hot seat. You're learning how to negotiate the world of design, and you're being forced to bring ideas in. You're being forced to talk about things. And those students kind of rise to the top. And not every student we're going to get are those kinds of students.
Can I add something to your point, Steve? Something that I've been thinking about for a long time. About and back to Joe's point about teachers wanting to be liked. When I first started teaching, I had what I called Willy Loman syndrome. I wanted to be liked. And that was the goal. And if you were liked, you got these really stellar student evaluations, and everybody thought you were the best thing in the world. But I might have not been the hardest teacher. And I would say now I'm at the other end of the spectrum of my career, and I'm not so interested in that. I'm more interested in the students being successful, which they are, and me preparing them as best I can, as far as they can go, to be prepared. And I think what's happening is part of what's contributing to this culture is that the evaluation of the quality of the education, this is to Steve's point about not being ashamed of their education, is happening in the moment. In other words, we're looking at student evaluations. We're looking about what is the student doing today? How does the student feel? How did the student feel yesterday? How did it go? And that is not a value, because that data is not useful, nor do I think is it accurate. I think the only way you can really have data on the success of your education, and whether or not you should be ashamed of it or proud of it, and whether or not it was effective, is after it has happened. And when you reflect back on it and look at it with objectivity, as opposed to when you're going through it. It's sort of like when you're climbing Mount Everest, it probably feels pretty crappy. But when you get to the top and you come down and it's a month or a year away, and you think back about what you did climbing Everest, you feel pretty good about it. And the pain of climbing Everest is no longer present. So I think that there's a response to the pain of going through school, the anxiety, the frustration, the difficulty, and that's what we're judging it on, as opposed to reflecting upon it after the fact and then deciding whether it was of value and how it worked. And I think that's a perspective that we don't have. And I think the way we do it now is sort of very 20th century, and I think we're smarter now. I think there's a better way for both the students and ourselves and our own administrators to look at the quality of the work through a different lens.
So in other words, you're saying student evaluations of the moment mean nothing?
They don't have the same weight as when a student talks to me 5 years or 4 years or 3 years after they've been out of the program and they reflect on what has happened. Because you don't put the education to use when you're getting the education.
Right.
You put the education to use and you apply it after you graduate, and that's when you find out whether or not it was effective or not.
That's always been my point, because we've all served on RTP committees, on retention, promotion, tenure committees, and different universities have different weights to their student evaluations. My university, the student evaluations are very high. I mean, as far as weight is concerned. My point is exactly yours, Stan, is that you do not judge a teacher until you see how many of those students, if they're graduate students, are working in the profession, are successful working in the profession. And as Joe says in this missive also, about how his students come back to him. And I'm sure for Steve and Stan, it's the same way, and for me. And they say, you were really hard on me, man, but boy, did I learn a lot. And thank God that you were tough on me during that production that I was doing in school, during the tech rehearsal, because that is what I just experienced, and I just handled it correctly because you taught me how to handle it correctly.
We're in agreement, David. There's no light between us on this, but it's not to take credit where credit is due, which is it is the student who does the work,
right,
who makes it happen, who becomes that successful person, not me. It's sort of like the coach taking credit for the team. It's not the coach. It really is the players who get the touchdown. So I put all the majority of the credit on the student when they're successful. I'm just the coach. But if my hands are tied behind my back and I can't really coach that team, then we never really see the talent of of how that guy could throw the football or run the ball or do the design work. And so, that's sort of how I feel about it, and I'm sticking with it.
I'm gonna just end this with one more quote from Joe's. He says, "The self-esteem movement surrounding our children and young adults may protect them from the hard knocks of life, but in doing so, it also keeps them from learning important lessons that are best learned through being called out for failure. Foremost among those important lessons is that respect is something that is earned through the proof of ability that comes from hard work and mastery."
Amen.
So, thank God we got through that. So Steve has our final question of the day.
It comes from Jennifer in the Netherlands, and she writes, "I'm having trouble hitting my target on stage with my follow spot. What can I do?" All right, right to the point. Build yourself a site.
Right.
Get yourself a bathroom tissue tube and a coat hanger and some gaffer's tape and tape yourself a site on there. You can buy a commercial site for $40 to $75. If you're a little imaginative, then I would talk to your TD or production manager and see if you're in a booth, you might be able to drill a very small hole in your follow spot so as to cast a light, a bit of spot on a wall behind you or above you or in front of you, and put yourself a little blackboard there. And then you can mark targets on that, and when you line the little bit of light spilling out of your site on where you've made that mark, and that mark reacts to a space on stage, you always have blind pickups done.
Yeah, that's the best one. I love that one.
But I think what really is going to make a difference is practice. And as they say, practice makes perfect. And if you want a goofy little drill to do, then get your follow spot all fired up and get yourself a couple buddies on stage and have them gently stand on quarter lines and just kick or throw a soccer ball to each other. And you follow that soccer ball, and you'll start to learn how much pressure you need to apply to the follow spot to get it to move, how much you have to lead it. You can land and stop without a jerky response. So practice is your biggest friend in learning how to run a follow spot.
if you use really old follow spots, you don't have to drill a hole in the follow spot.
They're already doing it.
No, because there's so much
tons of leaks.
There's tons of light leak coming out of those lights anyway. And let's hope they don't move the damn blackboard.
I love that method, though. That's the slickest method.
That's the old school, and it works every time.
It works great. Yeah.
Well, that Hammond organ solo tells us that once again you've spent another morning listening to Light Talk. You can listen to us on iTunes, Spotify, LiveDesignOnline.com, TuneIn, and just about every other podcast hosted site out there. Check out our website on lighttalk.org for future guests, and be sure to follow us on Facebook and subscribe to our podcast on iTunes. That way you will not miss a second of Light Talk fun.
No guarantee is offered regarding the accuracy of any statements or opinions made on this podcast. However,
if you should choose to litigate, the law firm of Fleck, Flock, Flair, and Glare and their paralegal Snoot will defend us until our retirement funds are depleted.
Light Talk is written and produced by the Lumen Brothers, coming to you from Long Beach, Gainesville, and the Lone Star State.
And be sure to tune in next week when we interview legendary producer, director, and rock and roll production designer Mark Brickman.
Light Talk, broadcasting questionable Lumen knowledge and humor around the world.
So we'll see you all next Saturday morning. Bye-bye from Light Talk.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Toodles.